came here, David Rohn, who's my next door neighbor, came by and warned me, since he's been listening to this for 37 years, not to whine. But whining is what I do. It's my DNA. It's what motivates me to keep on going. So I'm going to whine a lot. And because when I got involved seriously around 1958 in making sculpture, I determined, and the way I got to do that is I'd always wanted to do either architecture or sculpture from the time I was about 10. And as soon as they told me that A over B equals C, they lost me. So I quit the idea of being an architect. Many years later, Lou Kahn, the architect, told me it wouldn't have mattered because you could hire all those people who know all the math stuff, as long as you know how to organize a space, which is something which is probably the only thing I'm good at. And so, anyway, Michelangelo as a kid was my idol. I decided, well, I'm going to become a sculptor. You don't have to worry about the plumbing. So that's what I set out to do. And one thing led to another. By the time I got to Cornell as a graduate teaching assistant, I determined that if sculpture was going to realize its potential, it had to occupy the same kind of space as architecture without being dependent upon it. So I decided to make large outdoor works, large works for the outdoors, which meant that it was a decision that I've never regretted. However, it meant that the museums were not going to be where this work was going to be seen. They were going to be seen miles and miles away from any museum. And that's been something I've had to deal with for nearly 50 years now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring you through the trip I've made. I started out at Cornell doing large works out of railroad ties and stuff I picked up along the way in the forest and whatever, from abandoned railways and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to start. There's going to be an awful lot of instances where the works that you're going to see here, some exist, some don't exist. This was endemic of most works that were made after World War II for the outdoors. Nobody knew how to do that. One of the few artists who was doing works that could be outdoors was David Smith in America. The sculptors at that time were overshadowed by the great accomplishment of the New York School, the abstract expressionists. In fact, I think Ed Reinhardt was the one who said that sculpture was something you backed into when you're trying to look at a painting. So sculptors were considered to be muscle-bound jocks who had no brains in their head. That all changed with the advent of the minimalists, who were very, very good at polemics. They were able to write articles about what they were doing, and to the effect that if you weren't doing what I'm doing, you're no damn good. And so they intimidated the younger generation. And so even though I was friends with all these guys, especially at night at Max's Kansas City, and they liked what I was doing, they would never admit it, and I would never admit that I liked what they were doing. So, so that's how things. There's an awful lot of backbiting that goes on in the art world, but it's kind of like what you've just all been through with the election. And you say stuff that you don't always mean. And in a sense, we all get along because we all know what the other guy is trying to do. But anyway, I'm going to show slides, and I'm going to whine a lot about what's happened to all this work.
Can people hear okay?
Yeah.
Yes,
Well, I'm going to bring this mic over in case they don't. I sit down because I got a bad back. Okay, you could get the lights down and turn on the That's the piece I called Oxbow. I pulled that out of the lake in Watkins Glen when I was up at Cornell. Popped an oxbow thing on top of it. And that was one of the first pieces I did in around 1957, 58 that was of any kind of scale. That was eventually made into bronze, and both of them were completely destroyed in a fire in 2003 in a barn. And but I understand that the people who made the bronze still have the molds, so it's not a total loss. Oops. This is a piece I called Ithaca. It's made of railroad ties. I started it at Cornell, and then I moved down to New York, and I made this in a loft that was up about 6 flights, and I added the metal from the buildings that were being destroyed downtown, and I would pick up various pieces of steel, and it took about a year to build. At the time that I was making this, Peter Farakis and Peter used to teach at Wyndham, and we were painting Marcel Duchamp's apartment, and he told us, he told me when he saw photographs of his work, he says, don't show these works for at least 10 years, because they're too radical for what people are ready for. Well, unfortunately, they weren't. It wasn't too radical for me to get ripped off, and so I had to. Other sculptors started working this way, and so I had to abandon it and started making works that dealt with not only the skeletal form of the former work, but I wanted to get involved with color because color was a big bugaboo in those days. Nobody wanted to deal with color. They said it would ruin sculpture. So I went into it with a vengeance. This is a piece I called Splash. My landlord had all this material that was made of cardboard with canvas on both sides, and I could manipulate it and you know, make it into sculptural form, and then weld a framework and attach it. This was up in the when I moved down to New York, down on Green, corner of Green and Houston, and I put it up on my roof. The night that this picture was taken, there a giant storm wiped this piece out. So, I mean, this is part of my whining. Yeah. Yeah. This piece exists. It's in the collection of a friend of mine. It's the first piece I did that takes more than one position. This is hanging off the wall, and this is sitting freestanding.
Can you go back to the other one?
Yeah, let's go back. Would you go back?
Oh, they look like two.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing about my work is that my orientation, since I grew up in the Bay Area, which has lots of surprises as you move around space, and also my parents were very friendly with a lot of the Chinese people in the area, and we would go up for these big banquets up in Chinatown, and I was fascinated with calligraphy and the whole Chinese culture, and I think I got a kind of Eastern bias, not only from the Asian element, but from the landscape of the San Francisco Bay Area. There was a situation when I was about 18 months old where the family went for a picnic at Half Moon Bay, or it wasn't Half Moon Bay, it was someplace else, but it had giant cliffs that went directly down onto the beach. But they had these little trails. And my dad got out of the car and he walked to the edge of the cliff, and all of a sudden he disappeared, and I freaked out. And my mother grabbed me up and brought me to the edge and see, there's Daddy. But Daddy was already down by the beach, and he looked like an ant. And so that's when I think that's when I realized that the reality of illusion. And so illusion has spent a big part of my work, and what I've always tried to do is make works that breathe, that open and close, and look completely different from various points of view. And that's what these pieces do. Not all of these. Now, yeah. Now this piece, I had a show at Bennington in 1965 of these pieces. It was organized by Lawrence Alloway, and I had a bunch of these colored pieces that I had made from stuff I'd picked up off the streets of New York. And Paul Feely had helped organize it, and I discovered later that one of the reasons Alloway chose to have me show there was that he was having a big argument with Clem Greenberg, who had a lot of influence at Bennington College and had brought in Tony Caro, and so all the, it was a girls' school then, and all the sculpture around there looked like Tony Caro, so he did that he brought me in to needle Greenberg, and I didn't understand that until I got in the cafeteria with my assistant, who was a very black male, and we were ostracized. And so not only that, I was looking forward to talking with David Smith, who lived nearby and was going to be at the opening, and the day before the opening, of course, he was killed. So it was more like a wake. Anyway, this piece, all of the pieces at the Bennington show were supposed to be returned to me. They weren't, and so they said they didn't have the money, and of course by that time Paul Freely had died too, and so I told them, well, look, take care of them. I gave them a whole thing of how to take care of them, and they threw them in a lot, and I had to redo them. And this is before I redid it, and then I redid it again, and then after the fire in California, I redid it a third time. But it's looking great now. This piece does no longer exist. It's called Fiat Ascending. I grabbed a smashed Fiat car from a vacant lot and brought it up to my loft, and I built this piece around it.
The one that you just showed us, that you had shown at Bennington, did that have used car parts in it too, or was it entirely metal?
Just stuff that I picked up off the streets that were, maybe a car ran over it. But I took all this stuff and I gave it a different kind of life by throwing all that, welding it together, throwing all that color on it. And that's a piece I call TP. I traded that with John Chamberlain. He said he lost it. And I never got my Chamberlain.
How big is it?
Oh, that was about 4.5, 5 feet high. I was thinking of rebuilding it from photographs. Because I like it. That's a piece, I did a carnival in 1962 with a whole bunch of guys. It was during the period of happenings and all that.
Yeah.
And I organized a whole bunch of artists in 1962, and we did this carnival that we called Ergo Suits, and that was a name that Farakis came up with. And a lot of artists were involved with it. Walter Di Maria, Mark DeSilvero, Capro had happenings, and a lot of musicians, Lamont Young, and all the people that were involved with Fluxus, a pretty well-known group from the period. And I did a sculpture dance, and I enlisted the age of Tom Doyle and Eva Hess, who were married at the time. This is Eva's piece that you get inside of and you dance into it. She was too embarrassed to get inside this thing, so Capro got inside of it and danced in it.
Where is this?
That's Tom Doyle's. This is on the beach at Bridgehampton. We, after it was all over, I got all this material from my landlord, who was a rag picker, down in the basement, and I sewed everything together and all that. So. Anyway, that was Tom Doyle's. Mine is not in here. Mine was an 18-foot tower. I don't know what happened to the slide. This is, these are pieces I did in 1963. Somebody gave me some very springy stainless, and so I tied it together with stainless wire, and I made these stainless pieces, which I called warps.
You call them what?
Warps. Warps, yeah.
That other one was painted though, wasn't it?
What?
The one before this.
No, that's just
That's just a reflection of the.
that's a
nature
reflection
around
of the area around it. It's just
That's wonderful.
yeah. Well, there may. I read an article where I don't know. Is anyone familiar with the Torque ellipses of Richard Serra? Well, Richard got so excited about his torque ellipses that he tried to get a patent on the geometry. And when I walked inside of those, I said to myself, I've been in this space before somehow. And then I realized that, I'd done these pieces, in 30 years earlier, and I realized that they were more exciting when you stuck your head inside them than they were just looking at them, because they are only 2 feet high, and there was no way 30 years ago that, not even Calder and Smith were getting commissions in those days, in 1963. So there was no way to make them larger. So I abandoned the idea. And then, and they burn up in the fire anyway. But this is the piece that changed everything. This is Dante's Brig. And the lower structure of it was stuff I picked up off the streets. But and over the course of the year, I designed the upper section, which had these movable wings, and I had those manufactured in the Soho in those days. You could very cheaply get things like that made, and most of the rigging was stuff I got from boat hardware. And this is 1964. And after that, you can see in the back the Ithaca piece, and those are two of the more important pieces I did on that scale in those years. The lower structure, and all the stuff at the bottom, it still exists. All the upper stuff is gone in the fire, and I've been urged to rebuild it, and I figure it'll take me another 2 years to do that if I want to do it. But it is the piece that changed the direction of my work. After that, I purchased materials and built pieces. There it is.
Well, this is someplace I've seen. Where is this? Where is this located?
It's located on Quarry Road in Westminster.
Oh, it looks like a sculpture place I was in New York State recently with that wall.
Yeah.
What is it? Storm King, yeah. I thought it was
Yeah, well, they own about 3 of my works at Storm King, but this is not one of them. I wish it was because it still exists. But here's a piece that came after that called Green Mountain Blue. That's up in Westminster on my place. And then I was invited to Australia by a collector and made a version of it that's twice the size. This one's over 70 feet long. That's up in Cooma, Australia, and it's owned by the Australian National Museum. When I put that out, the people in the local area knew it was done by an American. They thought it was a CIA tracking station.
The color in that, is that, did you paint it or?
Yeah, painted blue.
Yeah. Nice.
Looks like it's needs another paint job. Then these are works I started doing in plexiglass, which they didn't hold up. Unfortunately, they were too delicate. They broke easily.
Did you bend that with heat?
No, I cut and glued.
Oh.
I cut and glued those pieces. But that's how it ends up in steel. Actually, that's bronze. That was eventually given to, I think it was, they had one of those meetings of all the nations that, the financial stuff, I forget what they call those meetings. It was in the Philippines, and somebody got the idea that all the nations should give sculpture for this park in the Philippines. And so it was during Clinton administration, and so the president or his wife or whatever had to choose something, and they chose that piece.
How tall is that?
That's only about 8 or 10 feet tall. And that was I gave that piece to the government.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. Then I discovered that I never paid to have it built. So, so I'm out that money. I still owe the money for building it. And this is a piece that still exists. It's over at Arcoma. It's usually on my property. It's called Goddard's Dream. And that's one side. It's all one color from one side and another color from the other side. These are pieces that I call my origami series.
And what paint were you using on those?
Oh, that was just aluminum with epoxy. This is a plexiglass piece which ended up in steel, looking like this, and called Dasa. And then finally, that's a large version of it at a park in Cleveland. It's been there for a number of years. That's another shot of it. Uh-oh. Something's happening. Oh, I lost it for you. This is one I call Ayatollah. That's at my place in Vermont. This is a version of, it's a little different from that. This is at Battery Park. made to, I could have taken this apart in about half an hour and gotten it out of there. I loaned it to the city. They came in and cut it all apart and threw it away. That piece is over at the Southern Vermont Arts Center. This piece I made when I first got to Wyndham College, and it was during the honeymoon series, honeymoon period, before I was always getting fired. And I got a grant from the Vermont State Council on the Arts to build this piece, and I had it built down in Connecticut at Lippincott, and we installed it up at Southern Vermont Arts Center. It's still there. It's called For the Fifth of Beethoven. Here's a piece that I call Dementia. These are pieces that are more illusionary. I think this piece is at the Hirshhorn. No, this piece is at the Met in New York. But these pieces are very flat and illusory.
Chuck, what's the dimension on this?
Oh, that's about 5 feet high and about 15, 16 feet long. That's called Tandem. That's out in the West Coast at the UC Berkeley Medical Center in San Francisco.
Some of these works that appear to be leaning, you have them affixed to the ground with metal rods that go down to hold the thing.
That piece actually only has it's so thin that all it has is a 2-foot plate that is bolted to. And of course it's, on site it's bolted down into concrete.
Well, how much do they weigh? I don't see how you keep it from falling over.
Well, that's the magic of steel. That's why I work with steel. Steel is strong.
Just hit that one little point, though.
Yeah, it looks like that. This is at Storm King. It's called Fayette for Charles and Medgar Evers. That's up at the farm. Zeus. That was first shown at the basement of the Max Hutchins Gallery. And the thing about it is a 2-year-old could come in and move it all around. And it banged and made all these sounds, so that's why it was called Zeus. John Cage loved the sound of these pieces.
It looks like, to me, as it was designed to go outside. I can't imagine that it would have worked as well in a
It
gallery.
went through the columns of the downstairs space, so it's kind of the same situation. And that's a version of a piece that I did at the Walker Art Center around 1974.
Where is that?
The Walker Art Center
Yeah.
in Minneapolis. That we borrowed the beams and then we gave them back after the show. And I had all kinds of problems with the engineers because a couple of months before they'd had a big Richard Serra, he did these big heavy pieces that leaned on one another, and they were held together with these tubes that had milled slits in them, and but the people who made them, the company that made them, cheated. Instead of making the tubes out of solid stock, they manufactured them and made them look like they were out of solid stock. So when they came to deinstall the piece, they were supposed to have two rigging implements. One is for safety, but the guy, the foreman of the job, couldn't read, so he didn't read that part, and so they took one part off and the other piece, and one of those tubes failed, and it flattened the guy like a Roadrunner cartoon. Yeah. So the engineers were all over me about this thing, and they kicked me out of the show about 4 times until we finally, the architect who built the building told them, look, this piece is safe, and all that kind of stuff. And so we finally got it in at the last minute. The last section went down into the lobby. And that's another version that I did at Max Hutchinson Sculptures Field in Canosa Lake. This is now at Art Omai up near Albany.
Is this the same as Zeus, or?
What?
No, it's not the same as Zeus.
No, Zeus is made out of I-beams, and this is made out of angle irons made into an X shape. 2 angle irons. Everything has to do with what you get and what you can afford. I mean, I found that there was a shipyard in Brooklyn that was going belly up. I was able to get a truckload of 6-inch by 6-inch angles that were this long, delivered to Vermont, for something like 14 cents a pound. And so that's why these pieces look the way they are. A lot of sculptures about economics.
You painted him yellow, right?
Yeah, John Deere yellow, so anybody can repaint him at any time. Make it simple. This is the basement of Sculpture Now. Mark DeCivero, Tom Doyle, Peter Fracas, and myself had a show called Sculpture Yesterday Today, where we had early works for when we all started out together, and then new works. This is one of the new works, called 3 Steel Plates. And after that show was over, it became a different sculpture. This is a piece I call 3 Parallelograms. That's usually on my property, but at the moment it's over at Art Omai. That's Labatt for Linda.
What?
Labatt.
Oh.
Labatt is kind of like when the Lipizzano horses get up on each other's backs. They call it a Labatt. I had a guy who came up to work on, I had a garden and he was going to rototill my garden. He came up and he says, I don't know if you know it or not, but you got an object down there that's falling down. And when I first started putting pieces up, old Bert Stockwell came up and brought me some roses for my garden and said, "You got some pretty interesting lawn furnishings around here." Now this is the kind of work I made from those 3 steel plates. This is a piece called Python. It's made out of parallelograms. The way that this happened was that I took a trip around the world. I got a Guggenheim and a NEA back to back, and so on the same year. And so I got the NEA to defer for a year. So I had 2 years of enough money to do sculpture full time, which was when I said sayonara to Wyndham College, and became in 1974, and for some reason I don't know how I've been able to make a living as a sculptor ever since, and this was inspired by the fact that at Stonehenge I got there about 5 in the afternoon, and I took photographs of the shadows that these monoliths were making, and because I'd felt, burned out by the time I took that trip around the world, and that gave me the idea for these pieces that I call, I give them all Greek titles for some reason, and this is the Hellenic series. And this is one of the biggest ones called Python. It's in a collection down in Woodside, California, at Runnymede Sculpture Park. It's another shot of it.
How big is it?
It's about 70 feet long and about 13 feet high. And that property is the property I used to wander around in as a kid when I was in high school. So I had no idea in those days that I would eventually... I have 5 pieces on this property. This is a reverse of that piece in the desert in Scottsdale. It's now in Reno, this piece.
When you say a reverse of it,
What?
What do you mean when you say a reverse of it? That it's taken from the angle?
All the Python pieces are going in on one another.
Oh.
These are going out from one another. So it's kind of a reverse, kind of a strange mirror image. Now, this piece was commissioned by SUNY Albany, and it stayed there for many years in this place. Well, then somebody decided at some point to do a parking lot there, which they never did. And actually, on this side, from where I'm standing, there was a jail. And this woman I know who had a cell in that jail for, said that that's one of her views out of her cell, and she one of the things that made life tolerable. But anyway, this piece, when they decided to do a parking lot there, the president of SUNY Purchase decided that he wanted it. So it was moved down to Purchase, New York, about 2 or 3 years ago. And for the first time since then, they were supposed to do this kind of landscaping around. I went to see it. I was on my way back up from New York. And they'd never done the landscaping. And that last piece at the top, evidently a piece of equipment had hit it, and that's the only piece that's not welded at the front and the back as well at the top. And so it was ripped off its moorings, and it's just hanging there by a 3-inch weld. So I raised holy hell, and right now they've gone out there and put all these kind of stanchions around and says keep out, and I hope they repair it. Because I said if they don't, I'm going to disown the piece. This piece called, it's in honor of my father. It's commissioned by Hewlett-Packard in Palo Alto. And this is different because this one is all connected at the top with a big ring. Actually, I think I misspoke. I think this is Pueblo Bonito. I don't know if anyone ever saw that site, Pueblo Bonito. It's Indian site that is oriented so that the sun comes, it's in shade during the summer, and the sun comes in during the winter.
Where is that?
That's in Houston, Texas. This piece here is now at Stanford, called Three Graces. This is no place to hide. That's at my farm, disassembled at the moment. Now that's a proposal for a piece. I wanted to make these sections about 70 feet long so that you could drive a truck through it. That piece is over at D. Cordova.
Oh, yeah.
It's called Texas Triangles. I also have a version of it up on my farm in Westminster. And that's at the farm in Westminster. That piece I call Bali. It's made from when I made the Hellenic pieces, I made parallelograms, and I ended up with piles of triangles that I didn't know what to do with. And so this is the result of that. try not to let anything go to waste. This piece also ended up in Stanford, part of their collection.
Ended up where?
Stanford University. It's called Chicago triangles. Yeah, but that kind of color.
That's not accurate?
Well, I mean, that's the kind of color you see on the Sarah Turks ellipses, but as soon as anything gets outdoors, it all goes to that color on that piece over there. This is only transitory. That gray is mill scale. And mill scale is how, when they roll the steel out, when it cools, it has this very tough mill scale on it, and it eventually wears off. And so a lot of times I just have it sandblasted off so that it goes into its rust cycle quicker. Because you're going to do that anyway after, 10, 20 years. That's after, that same piece after the sandblasting. So you should note the piece kind of looks different from all angles. See a little Henry Moore over there in the background. This piece I made out of 14 karat gold.
Where is it located? Fort Knox?
Fort ex-wife. The piece is called Cantilever. That's San Mateo Bridge. That's down in, that's actually in front of the Genome Center from Stanford University.
What's the date of these pieces, more or less?
More or less, this is 80s, I think. I don't pay much attention because if I have an idea I like and I don't have the money to make it, I'll wait 20 or 30 years before I make it and get the money. So I don't care about chronology. This piece, I think, was, I think Hughes Aircraft got that one. This piece is Hangover 2. That piece was at Max Hutchinson's Sculpture Fields. But this is the most difficult engineering job I ever did because there's the piece is about 22,000 pounds, and the back section is quite heavy, and I had to make it so it wouldn't sag.
Chuck, when you do the things of this magnitude, do you work right from sketches, or do you also make a little wooden model?
I make a maquette. I make a maquette, and we work from the maquette.
Out of cardboard or what?
Usually, a lot of that piece over there that I'm going to show you is made of foam core, and I just put wax on the outside. I can send that to a foundry, and they can reproduce that. They can, just burn it out and send me one out of bronze. It looks just like that. But this piece is made out of 1-inch steel. In some places it's 2-inch steel that we had to double up on the steel for, like that front section at the far left had to be doubled up to so the piece would balance. I had to get it so it would balance perfectly. Now, that piece is going out to Santa Rosa It's in Connecticut right now, because we had to cut it apart during a big storm, and we kind of torqued it a little bit. It had to be repaired down at a factory down in Connecticut that I discovered on the internet, who makes all the Tony Smiths, and they did a great job of repairing it. And now they finally got the permits from the city of Santa Rosa, and it's going out there to park there.
Does it go on a 16-wheeler truck? Is that how it gets there?
Well, actually, the upper section, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sections, that gets flopped over. They put it side by side. It can get on a like a 25, 30-foot drop bed trailer. And but it costs a lot more to send it from the east to the west than it does from the west to the east. For some reason, I don't know.
And then when they put it back together, are you there, or do they just know how to do it?
I'm not going to be there, but I made sure that the toughest job of repairing this piece is finding out how to pick it, so they could get the bolts in. And I told them to put markings exactly where it's supposed to be picked. And
Picked up?
huh?
As in picked up?
Picked up, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, because it's a very tricky proposition, and also dangerous. They said that they picked it up with grab clamps, and I don't like to use grab clamps. I like to use straps. And they said they got the piece down, and one of their grab clamps fell apart. If that had happened up in the air, somebody would have gotten killed. So that's another shot of it. It takes, depending on when you walk around it, it's either 1, 2, or 3 sections. And that's the whole thing. This piece is called Ginnever. That's out at Runnymede in Woodside. That place that I used to wander around. This is Luna Moth Walk. 1, 2, and 3. And they're all made from exactly the same template. It's just that the center section is bent at a different place in each one. If you take a look, you can see, I don't know if I can get this in focus. They're all just different. And this piece I call High Rise. That's in Reno at the moment. That's when it was in Scottsdale.
When you say, I know you've had a lot of trouble with some of this stuff, when you say it's in Reno at the moment, does that mean it's on loan?
Yeah, well, a dealer.
If somebody else
It's at a
wants
dealer's
it,
place. It was in the city, but started getting called Kitsune. That is the horizontal and vertical positions of exactly the same piece.
what's that animal in the background?
And so that's it. The same piece on the right, same piece on the left. One's vertical, one's horizontal. Even Richard Serra couldn't believe it. And he's got a good eye. Oh, this is an interesting group because I'd gotten, I thought maybe if I got into computers, I'd be able to work faster. So I got this was in the days when I had a little Commodore Amiga, spent a fortune on the damn thing. About $5,000 for about 8 megabytes, and it had this 3D program, and you had to have. There were 3 different orientations, A, B, and C. And I could never figure out. Now you make a move on the computer one way, and 2 other lines are moving. And so I tried to design this piece on it, and I designed the piece, but then when I went to animate it, it kept doing crazy things. And I figured out that the reason it was doing all those crazy things is that the program was built on Renaissance perspective, which is a 2-dimensional idea. It has nothing to do with reality. So these pieces were stretching and jumping all over the damn place. So what I did was I took snapshots of it. And then I put that on cardboard, and then I cut out the snapshots and I made sculpture out of it. And this is all one drawing from 6 different points of view. Same drawing. So that's what 2 dimensions will do in 3 dimensions. Here's a piece I call Détente. Made it in Vermont, but it's now out in California. This is part of what I call the slant rhyme series. Somebody told me one of the slant rhyme pieces was in the newspaper or something. This piece ended up by the lake in Lake Tahoe. Beautiful setting. Same piece. Another different slant rhyme piece. There's that piece, Dementia, right after I made it. It's still got the mill scale on. Same piece, different perspective. Now this piece I call Transitions for Thelonious Monk. That's all the same piece in 3 different positions. Made those in around the 2000, 2001 and 2002, I think.
These all signed?
I don't know. I don't know if I signed them. I think if you don't sign them, you can't. The IRS can't say their inventory because they can always be a work in progress. And then when you sell it, you can sign it. Oh, this is Dante's. No, this is Rashomon. I don't know if anyone. how many people saw the movie, Rashomon. Yeah, it's about, it's a Kurosawa movie about a bandit who commits a crime. Yeah, and there are various different witnesses, and everybody gives an account of the incident that's very self-serving. And so this is a piece that I made where I used to have all my parallels. I used to have parallels and rectangles to kind of like a drumbeat in making sculpture. Then I decided that I was going to skew all the perspectives in the work and make it so that everything was chaotic. In other words, some perspectives receded in space and some expanded in space. And I found that during the maquette, that when I did that, a certain structural integrity happened where no matter, and it surprised me, no matter what position I put the piece in, it wouldn't fall over. And so, at first I resisted that intention because, that was the one canon that sculpture is always, no matter what happened in the 20th century, to change everybody's idea about what sculpture was in terms of abstract sculpture, it always had one way to sit upon the earth. But these didn't. And I couldn't figure out which position I liked more. So then I decided to push it. I got the original one took 11 positions without falling over. So I kept tweaking the angles and stuff until I finally got to the point where I got the piece to sit at 15 positions without falling over. And so then I built the big piece. This is 13 feet high. That just is going to a collector somewhere in the Denver area, I understand. This is a show I had at Stanford. What?
These are identical pieces?
They're all, this is the same piece.
Yes.
You should know because you got one. Yeah. This is, I had a show of, it was commissioned by the Gerald Peters Gallery for their, the opening of their new gallery in Santa Fe, and then it went down to Stanford for a couple of years, and then to a private residence for a couple more years.
Chuck, there's about 15 more minutes.
Okay.
If you want to take some questions, it's up
Okay,
up to you. However
this
people
is
want
the
to do
end.
this, just letting you know.
I think I'm at the end of the slides. That's it.
Good timing.
It's hard to find City Hall, and I found that what the law was in New York is that you can't alter an artist's work in any way. But if you own it, you can destroy it. And the Parks Department claimed that since it had been there for 17 years, they owned it. So they could destroy it if they wanted to. So, go figure. And I mean, in Europe, they have better laws for protecting art.
Well, couldn't you just, when you sell a piece, say that in the event that you want to get rid of it, you retain the right of first refusal or something like that?
Yeah, but then you have to buy it back. And I remember Robert Rauschenberg telling me once that, there was a work of his that was going up for auction, and he didn't like it. He wanted to destroy it, but he couldn't afford to even bid on it. Oh, yeah, I wanted to... you're welcome to come up and play with this. This is a piece I'm considering making. I've got the plans for it. It was done by an engineer who knows how to do all that stuff. But these are some of the positions it takes. I want to make it about 17 feet tall.
That's amazing.
And see, so from every angle, you can play with it if you want. It performs a lot of stuff that no other sculpture can perform.
You saw work, you agree not to make another one, just like that?
No. Well, yes, to a certain extent. All you have to do is, if you want to make a different one, make a different size. Because these come in all kinds of sizes.
You have an archivist who keeps track of all your projects and photographs?
Me, I've got. There's a woman out in California who was doing this up to the point where I couldn't pay her anymore, and then so I do it now. I try to photograph pieces as I make them and make a few notes about them. My daughters are going to have to worry about that afterwards. And all this kind of stuff is easy to fake. So I don't know how they're ever going to authenticise anything. I mean, anybody can fake this stuff. So.
Are you the only contemporary American sculptor who makes these works that can be put in different positions?
No, there are a few others. I mean, Robert Morris did an L shape that he put in 3 different positions. That was back in the 60s. But it still looked like an L shape. No matter what you did to it. It looked like the same sculpture no matter what. And most of this stuff does. Because the works are not, each element of that sculpture is not necessarily identifiable. You can't really name the kind of form it is. It has a tendency to look completely different every time you put it in a different position. Now that, I think, is pretty much unique to my work. I haven't seen other artists whose work does take a number, like Solowit did like U shapes that went whole things full of them, but they were all different. One had 6 legs, one had 4 legs, one had they were all different, and they were upside down and right side up and all this kind of stuff, but they didn't look any different, And this changes his identity as you move around it. And that's the thing that excites me now. That's going to probably keep me going for a while.
That's amazing.
That's...
Let's say you sell that piece to some museum or some individual.
Yeah.
Can you next week make another one?
Yeah, just a little bit different size. Unless I declare it as an addition. If I declare it as an addition, I'll say I'll make 4 of them, and with 2 APs, artist proofs. And then once that's gone, it's like I had a little 10-inch edition of that Rashomon. and I made 4 of them with 2 APs. Well, I sold them all, and I gave the 2 to my daughters in sets of 3 pieces. And then I kept a prototype set of 3 that I'd made for myself. But then if you make it out of, say, bronze, it's a different thing. It's not a steel piece, it's a bronze piece. And of course, if you make it 12 inches or 8 inches, it's a different.
It's different.
Yeah, so you got leeway. Yeah. But
I noticed that in a lot of your slides, your pieces really seem to integrate nicely with the environment that they were in. Is that something that you have the frequent opportunity to do? Is get asked to do a piece for a certain space and then design
unlike a lot of
space?
sculptors, I insist on. It's like this piece, the 3 Russia mounts that are going to the Denver area. I said they don't go anywhere unless I'm on site when it goes up. And I work with the collector to decide what positions to choose for the first installation. And after I'm gone, they can bring a crane in and do anything they damn well please with it. Because they own it. It doesn't belong to me anymore. So, but the point is, I want the piece to perform properly. So I insist on being on site. It's like at Running Mead down in Woodside. I've got 5 pieces. I've got 5 of the best sites that I fought tooth and nail to get. And with arguing with the wife and all that kind of stuff to get those sites. And the other sculptors come in and they say, God damn it, you got all the good sites. Yeah. But they didn't pay any attention. They just sent the piece and got the money. But I'm one of those sculptors who thinks that if the piece isn't sited properly, it's not going to perform well. It's just not going to do its job. And a work of art has a job to do. And it's got to do that job many, many years after you're gone. And so you're still responsible. It's just like what I told the people at the Newberger when I sent them an email, when I got home. I said, look, you're screwing up my reputation and yours by showing this piece in a half-baked way. And if you don't fix it, I'm going to disown it.
Do you consider orientation and light and shadow when
Yes.
you create the piece and when you
Yeah.
install it?
Yeah, I always bring a compass on site with me. See where the sun's going to be when the sun is out. Well, one thing I learned when I got to Vermont was that these pieces have different facets, and because of the different, as that snow shot you saw of, some pieces disappear in the snow, and other facets you can see. Well, that I learned how to tweak all that when I moved to Vermont, and so my pieces go through the seasons. I was able to tip things one way or the other to take advantage of those seasonal changes.
To either shed or catch the snow.
Yeah. So, outdoor works are a completely different situation than indoor works. And some artists, like I found that my works that were organic, when you put them outdoors, the landscape crushed them. These works like that, you can put them far away and they hold their scale. So, you learn how to work work outdoors. But that means that the museums are going to turn their back on you completely. So you got to be prepared for that.
How do you prepare for that?
You just, I don't know. I haven't figured that out. You know,
Say
I've
one
suffered a
more.
lot by being an artist who doesn't, whose works look better outdoors than they do
Well, don't a
indoors.
lot of museums now have sculpture areas, like thinking of Houston's Sculpture Park? Different ones.
They're so, like the one in Houston is,
So contained.
it's made by an architect. And architects are so damn jealous of sculptors. And, you know, so they subvert everything. I mean, I remember down in New Orleans, they were going to have this big program of outdoor sculpture, and so what do? They got a bunch of architects to advise them. I said, as long as you get architects to advise them, you're not going to have a single sculpture outdoors in New Orleans. And that's exactly what happened.